She almost dropped the sack, not because it was heavy, because the whisper reached her before she was ready. "She's the one," a man said, low and sharp. "Married for a family, came back alone." Margaret Boone tightened her grip and kept moving. Her hands shook anyway. When the flowers slid from her arms and burst against the boards, white dust climbed her skirt. Laughter followed. Small. Mean. She bent to clean it, cheeks burning, breath thin, telling herself to stand. Just stand. A shadow fell across the porch. "Let me," a man said, not loud, not kind enough to sting. Just steady. She looked up. The stranger's eyes didn't search her. They waited. Why would anyone wait? The rain had quit over Cedar Hollow Valley, leaving the air warm and hushed. Samuel Crow rode down from the ridge with mud on his boots and the smell of wet leather clinging to him. He had come for feed and quiet. He found a woman fighting both. Samuel lifted the spilled sack as if it weighed nothing. He set it on her wagon, then gathered the rest without a word. Margaret watched his hands. They were careful. He didn't rush. He didn't ask. "Thank you," she said. It came out smaller than she meant. He tipped his hat. "You're welcome." She nodded toward the hills, eyes fixed there, as if they could hold her upright. "I used to live beyond them." Samuel studied her once more. Not the dress, not the thinness. The way she stood after being spoken over. The way she breathed through it. "The world breaks," he said. "Sometimes it builds again." She gave a smile that barely showed. Then she climbed onto the wagon and left. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He lay awake in the cabin with the fire breathing low, listening to his son's soft steps above. Luke was 6 and made noise even when dreaming. Samuel counted them like beads. He had been alone 5 years now. The ache still found him when the house went quiet. At dawn he worked the east field. At dusk he fed the mare. His life kept time. It helped him stand. A week later, Margaret Boone appeared at the schoolhouse. The teacher had taken ill, and Margaret came to help. No announcement, just work. She spoke little. The children watched her hands. They followed her voice because it didn't ask to be heard. Luke came home talking. "She listens," he said, mouthful of cornbread. "She waits." Samuel felt something shift. Margaret began to pass by the ranch on supply days. She brought thread, a loaf, sometimes nothing at all. Luke met her at the fence. He showed her his sums. She corrected them with a finger, not a sigh. Once, she gave him a small horse she had carved from scrap wood. "It runs," Luke said. "See?" Samuel watched her smile then. It arrived slowly. It stayed. Days leaned into weeks. Margaret mended shirts at the table. She sat by the fire without filling the room with words. She listened. The cabin learned her shape. One evening, Samuel found her at the corral fence, the sky burning down to embers. They stood together. No hurry. "Luke's a good boy," she said. "He reminds me life grows, even when you think it won't." Samuel nodded. He had thought the same. He turned to her then, voice low. "You'd make a fine mother." She swallowed. The light caught in her eyes. "I can't have children," she said. "The doctor told me years ago." A pause. "I've learned to live with it." Samuel looked toward the pasture where Luke chased dust. His voice didn't change. "Then you'll raise mine instead." She stared. Her breath left her in pieces. "You mean?" "This ranch needs more than one heart," he said, "and my boy needs someone who loves him like her own." Tears came. She didn't wipe them. "I don't deserve that." "Grace isn't wages," Samuel said. "It's a gift." Margaret moved in quietly, not as a bride, as a help, as a presence. The cabin warmed. Luke laughed more. The work steadied. Then the whispers grew teeth. A dry summer pressed the valley. Notes came due. Talk followed. Some said Samuel pitied her. Others said he'd lost sense, trusting a woman who couldn't give him a family. Margaret heard it all. One afternoon she watered the last row and heard 2 women at the fence. "That boy," one said. No brothers, no sisters. She can't give him a family, the other answered. The words found every old wound. That night, Margaret sat by the fire, hands shaking. Samuel, she whispered, maybe this was a mistake. You deserve more. He crossed the room and knelt before her. You've given me peace, he said, and my son a mother. Let the town talk. She leaned into him and cried, not from sorrow, but from relief that hurt. They married under the oak behind the barn. Luke stood between them. The vows were plain. The love was not. Autumn came soft. Then one morning, Margaret fainted feeding the chickens. The doctor stayed long. When he stepped out, his eyes held wonder. She's expecting, he said. Margaret whispered. That's not possible. The doctor smiled. It seems the Lord had other plans. Samuel looked at her, heart full and trembling, knowing everything in their lives was about to change. The doctor's words did not leave the room when he did. They stayed, they hovered, they pressed against the walls like a held breath. Samuel stood by the door, hat in his hands, staring at the place where the man had been. Margaret sat at the table, one hand on the wood, the other folded tight in her lap. Her face had gone pale, as if the blood had stepped back to think. That's not possible, she said again, softer now, as if saying it quietly might make it true. Samuel crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. He didn't touch her yet. He waited until she looked at him. Her eyes were wide, frightened, searching for a reason to believe, and a reason not to. You fainted, he said. You've been tired, sick in the mornings. I thought it was the heat, she said, or nerves. She laughed once. It broke. I've been told no my whole life. He reached for her hand then. She let him. Sometimes no just means not yet. She pulled her hand back and stood. The chair scraped. Don't, she said. Don't make this hope. I can't carry hope like that. Samuel watched her pace the room. He saw the old habit in it. The way she moved, as if preparing to be disappointed. He knew that walk. He had learned it after his wife died. Whatever comes, he said, we face it together. Margaret stopped by the window. Outside, Luke chased the dog through dry grass, laughing, unaware of the shift inside the house. She pressed her palm to the glass. I don't know how to be this, she said. I only just learned how to be useful. Samuel stood behind her, not close enough to crowd. You're more than useful. The days that followed moved strangely. The doctor returned. He spoke careful words. He shook his head more than once, still surprised. He left bottles and instructions and warnings. Margaret listened. She nodded. She asked questions with a steady voice that did not match her hands. The town found out. It always did. Some whispered miracle, others whispered mistake. A few smiled to her face and frowned when she turned away. Margaret felt it all. She carried it quietly, like another weight. At night she lay awake, listening to Samuel's breathing. She counted it the way she used to count the ticks of the schoolhouse clock. Proof of time passing. Proof she was still here. I'm afraid, she said one night, the words loose in the dark. Samuel shifted, propped on an elbow. Of what? Quote, of losing it, she said, of losing you, of proving them right. He took her hand and placed it over his heart. This doesn't belong to them. Luke was the first to notice the changes. He watched Margaret move slower. He brought her water without being asked. One afternoon, he climbed onto the bench beside her and rested his head against her arm. You're quiet, he said. She smiled. I'm listening. To what? To something growing. He thought about that, then grinned. Like beans. She laughed. It surprised her. The sound felt new. Summer leaned toward fall. The ranch worked on. Samuel rose earlier. He brought Margaret a stool in the kitchen. He learned to watch her face for signs she didn't speak. She learned to let him. One afternoon, a woman from town came by with sugar and a tight smile. We heard, she said. "It's unexpected." Margaret thanked her. After the woman left, Margaret sat down hard. "I don't want to be watched," she said. Samuel poured her tea. "Then don't be." But the watching continued. At the store, at church, at the fence line. Every look asked the same question: would it last? Margaret began to doubt her body. Every ache felt like a warning. Every quiet hour felt like a test. She held her breath through days, through weeks. Then came the bleeding. It was light, it was brief, it was enough. Margaret folded in on herself by the wash basin, hands slick, heart racing. Samuel found her there, face gray, eyes empty. "It's gone," she said. "I knew it would be." He wrapped her in his arms. He did not argue, he did not promise. He held her until the shaking passed. The doctor came again. He examined. He listened. He sat longer this time. "It may pass," he said finally. "Or it may not. We won't know today." Margaret stared at the floor. "I can't do this again." Samuel knelt in front of her. "Then we do it slowly, one day." That night she packed a small bag. Samuel found it by the door. "I don't want you to wake up and see me broken," she said. "I don't want Luke to see it." He closed the door gently and leaned against it. "You don't get to leave love behind to spare it," she cried then, the kind that took her breath. Samuel stayed with her until dawn. The bleeding stopped. The days passed. The doctor returned. His face was calm this time. "The child is still there," he said. Margaret closed her eyes. Relief came sharp and frightening. Winter crept in early. Margaret's belly began to show. She stitched a small blanket at the table. Her hands were steadier now. Luke watched, wide-eyed. "Is it real?" he asked one morning. She nodded. "Very." Samuel stood at the doorway, watching them, feeling the weight of something precious and fragile settling over his life. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow threatened the ridge. And Samuel knew that whatever joy was coming would be tested again before it could stay. 3. Winter arrived without asking. The first snow came sideways, sharp and sudden, driving the cattle tight against the fence and sealing the valley in white. Samuel worked longer hours. He rose before light and came in after dark, his coat stiff with frost. Margaret watched from the window, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other pressed flat against the glass. She felt heavy now, careful. Each step was measured, each breath counted. "You shouldn't be up," Samuel said one night, finding her still awake by the fire. "I wanted to hear you come in," she said. He sat beside her and warmed his hands. The silence between them felt different now. Not empty, watchful. Luke thrived in the cold. He ran through snowbanks and tracked rabbits with serious eyes. He spoke to Margaret's belly as if it could answer. "Are you coming yet?" he asked once, crouched low. Margaret laughed. "Not yet." He nodded, accepting the answer. "Okay." The town changed its tone as her shape became harder to deny. Some smiles softened. Others sharpened. A few offered help. More offered opinions. Margaret took what she needed and left the rest behind. She had learned the shape of her own strength. But fear still found her. One night, a hard pain woke her. It spread slow and deep, like a warning. She sat upright, heart racing, breath shallow. Samuel was awake at once. "What is it?" quote. She shook her head. "I don't know." The pain faded. It left her trembling. The doctor said it was normal. "The body remembers," he said, "even what the mind was told to forget." Margaret held that thought close. Weeks passed. Snow piled high. Supplies ran thin. Samuel made a hard ride into town through wind and ice. He came back with less than he wanted and more worry than he admitted. One evening, as Margaret folded Luke's shirts, she heard voices outside. She recognized them. 2 men. Neighbors. Not friends. "Shouldn't risk it," one said. "That child won't last." Margaret froze. "She was told barren," the other answered. "Bodies don't forget that." Samuel's voice cut through, low, firm. "You're done here." The men left. The words stayed. Margaret did not speak of it. But that night she dreamed of empty rooms and woke crying. Samuel held her until the shaking eased. "They don't get a vote," he said. Spring came slow and wet. The snow melted into mud. The creek swelled. The fields breathed again. Margaret's belly grew round and sure. She moved with new care, but also with a growing calm. She planted seeds with Luke watching close. "Does it hear me?" he asked. "Maybe," she said. "Talk anyway." The doctor came often now. Each visit ended with a nod, with cautious hope. Then came the night of the storm. Thunder rolled down the valley, loud and close. Rain hammered the roof. Margaret woke with a sharp cry and doubled over, pain fierce and sudden. Samuel was on his feet before she finished breathing. He wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to the table. The pain came again, stronger. "It's too early," she whispered. "It's too soon." Samuel sent Luke to the neighbors. He saddled the horse and rode hard for the doctor through rain and mud. Margaret labored through the night, breath ragged, hands gripping wood. She prayed. She cursed. She begged. When the doctor arrived, soaked and pale, he worked without pause. The hours blurred. Dawn crept in, gray and thin. The child came silent. Margaret's heart stopped. "Please," she whispered. "Please." Quote, Then a cry broke the room open, small, fierce, alive. Margaret sobbed as the doctor laid the baby in her arms. A girl, tiny, perfect. Samuel stood frozen, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face. He dropped to his knees and laughed once, broken and whole all at once. They named her Grace. The town came calling after that, some with gifts, some with apologies, some with awe. Margaret accepted none of it too closely. She stayed home, rocking Grace by the fire, watching Luke hover like a proud guard. Samuel found her there one evening, light fading soft around them. He leaned in the doorway and watched his family breathe. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up. Her eyes were tired. They were full. "I am." Outside, the valley settled into quiet. Inside, Samuel knew the world had shifted again, and that holding this peace would take as much courage as surviving the years without it. Grace changed the sound of the house. Not louder, fuller. The cabin learned new rhythms. The hush between cries. The soft creak of the rocker. The way Luke tiptoed without being told. Samuel noticed it most at night, when the fire settled and the wind pressed close, and the small breathing by the hearth made everything feel held together. Margaret moved carefully in those first weeks. Her body was tired in a deep way she had never known. Still, she rose when Grace stirred. She hummed when the baby would not settle. She learned the weight of her daughter's head against her chest, and the way calm came when she stayed still. Samuel watched her learn herself again. He brought water. He cooked when he could. He kept Luke busy. He took on the early mornings so Margaret could rest. None of it felt like sacrifice. It felt like order, returning to a place that had been waiting. The town came in pieces. A basket left by the fence. A note slipped under the door. A woman from church standing awkwardly with folded hands. Margaret accepted the food. She read the notes later. She kept the door mostly closed. "I don't want Grace carried like a story," she said one morning as Samuel mended tack. "I want her carried like a child." He nodded. "Then we keep it small." Quote, But small did not last. A week after Grace's birth, the banker arrived. He rode up alone, hat set just so, boots clean. He stood by the fence and waited to be seen. Samuel went out to him, jaw tight. "Congratulations," the man said, "about the child." Samuel didn't answer. "I came about the note," the banker continued. "The drought last year put you behind, with another mouth." "She's fed," Samuel said. "I don't doubt it," the banker replied. "But numbers don't care about sentiment." Margaret heard it from the doorway. She held Grace close and felt the old fear stir, not for herself, for the life she had brought into the world. Samuel walked the banker back to his horse. He spoke low. firm. The man rode off without a smile. That night, Samuel sat at the table long after the lamps were dim. Margaret watched him, rocking Grace. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said. He looked up. "I know." Still he did. He took extra work. He traded labor for grain. He sold 2 head early. He did not speak of the cost. Margaret saw it anyway. She saw it in his shoulders when he came in late. In the way he sat without moving, just listening to the house breathe. Luke sensed it too. "Are we in trouble?" he asked one evening, voice careful. Samuel met his eyes. "We're working." Luke nodded. He went back to carving. He brought the finished shape to Grace's cradle. "This one's strong," he said. Spring leaned into summer. Grace grew. Her cries softened. Her eyes learned faces. She wrapped her fingers around Samuel's thumb and held tight. Margaret's strength returned in pieces. She walked the yard again. She helped in the garden. She sang while she worked, quiet songs she had never sung before. Then came the fever. It took Grace first. A low heat. Restlessness. Margaret noticed it before anyone else. She held her close and counted breaths. By morning, the fever climbed. Samuel rode for the doctor at once. The day stretched thin and long. Margaret cooled Grace with cloths. She whispered prayers she had not spoken since girlhood. The doctor came near dusk. He worked fast. He left medicine and warnings. "Watch her," he said. "If it breaks, she'll be fine. If not—" Margaret nodded. She did not ask him to finish. The night was endless. Grace cried until she couldn't. Then she went still. Margaret rocked and rocked, heart pounding, fear sharp enough to taste. Samuel paced. Luke sat silent by the fire, eyes fixed on the cradle. Near dawn, Grace sighed. The fever broke. Margaret wept into Samuel's chest, relief pouring out of her like rain after dust. He held her until the sun came pale through the window. They did not speak of how close it had come. Weeks later, another knock came. This time it was the woman from the fence, the one whose words had once cut deep. She stood with her head bowed, hands empty. "I was wrong," she said, "about you, about this." Margaret studied her. The woman did not ask forgiveness. She did not explain. She waited. Margaret nodded once. "I know." The woman left lighter than she arrived. Life steadied again, but Samuel knew better than to trust calm. He watched the sky. He counted stores. He held his family close. One evening, as the sun fell red, Margaret stood on the porch with Grace on her shoulder and Luke at her side. Samuel joined them. For a moment, everything aligned. Then, far off, thunder rolled where no storm should be. Samuel felt it in his bones. Another test was coming. The storm did not come with rain. It came with men. They rode in from the south, just after sunrise. 3 of them, dust heavy on their coats and hunger written plain in the way they looked at the land. Samuel saw them first from the far fence line. He straightened slowly, one hand resting on the post, eyes narrowing. Trouble never announced itself. It studied first. The men stopped at the edge of the pasture. One raised a hand in greeting that didn't reach his eyes. Samuel walked out to meet them, steps measured, voice calm. "Morning," he said. "We're looking for work," the tallest man replied. His smile was thin. "Heard you had stock." Samuel glanced back toward the house. Margaret stood in the doorway, Grace against her shoulder, Luke half hidden behind her skirt. Samuel turned back at once. "No work today," he said, "and no sale." The man's eyes followed Samuel's glance. His smile faded. "Shame," he said. "Land like this. Family like that." Samuel felt the warning settle deep. That night he moved the rifle closer to the door. He checked the locks twice. He said nothing to Margaret, but she felt the shift in him. She always did. "They won't come back," she said softly, more hope than certainty. Samuel kissed Grace's head. "I don't count on hope." The men came back 2 nights later. Luke woke first, the sound of hooves pulling him from sleep. He shook Margaret hard. "Someone's here." Samuel was already up. The men moved fast, cutting toward the barn. Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. "Leave," he called. "Now." One laughed. Another raised a gun. The shot cracked the night open. Samuel fired once. The sound tore through the valley. The men scattered, curses trailing behind them as they fled into the dark. Silence followed. Heavy, ringing. Margaret's knees gave out. Samuel caught her before she hit the floor. Grace cried, sharp and frightened. They did not sleep again that night. By morning, neighbors came. Questions followed. Advice. Warnings. Some offered help. Others offered fear dressed as concern. "You can't raise a child out here alone," one man said, "not with trouble moving through." Samuel nodded. "I'm not alone." But the words followed Margaret after they left. That evening she stood by the fire, Grace asleep in her arms, Luke drawing shapes on the floor. Samuel watched her face tighten with thought. "This started because of us," she said at last, "because of me." Samuel crossed the room at once. "No. They came because you have something worth taking," she said, "and because they thought I made you weaker." He shook his head. They were wrong. She looked at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then let me be strong too." The next days were hard ones. Samuel set traps. He repaired fences. He spoke with neighbors about watches and shared routes. Margaret took over the ledger at night, counting grain, measuring what could be spared. She worked quietly, steadily, the way she always had. Luke helped where he could. He carried water. He fed the chickens. He stood taller. One afternoon, the banker returned. This time, he did not get off his horse. "I heard about the trouble," he said. "That kind of thing scares investors." Samuel folded his arms. "Say what you came to say." The banker cleared his throat. "I can give you time, or I can take the land now and save you the fight." Margaret stepped out onto the porch. "You won't," she said. The banker turned, surprised. "This land feeds our children," she continued. "You'll wait." The banker studied her. Something in her face made him look away. "I'll come back in the fall," he said at last. After he left, Samuel exhaled slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," she said, "I did." Summer deepened. The men did not return. The valley watched. The family endured. One night, Margaret found Samuel sitting outside, staring at the dark. "I don't want this life to cost you," he said, without looking up. She sat beside him. "It already gave me more than I ever thought I'd have." Quote, she took his hand and placed it over Grace's chest. The baby stirred, breathing strong and steady. "This," she said, "is worth the risk." Samuel leaned into her, the weight of months pressing down and lifting at once. But far beyond the ridge, clouds gathered again, slow and heavy, promising one final reckoning before peace could truly stay. The reckoning came quietly, not with gunfire or fire in the night, with paper. The banker returned in early autumn, riding alone, dust on his boots this time. He dismounted slowly and waited at the fence. Samuel walked out to meet him, posture steady, heart ready. "I came for my answer," the banker said. Samuel nodded once. "You have it." Margaret stepped onto the porch with Grace on her hip. Luke stood beside her, shoulders squared. The banker noticed them all. He noticed the order, the calm. Samuel handed over the ledger. The banker frowned as he flipped through the pages. Grain traded, labor counted, debts marked down. Every line, careful, honest. Margaret had kept it that way. "You've been busy," the banker said. "We've been living," Margaret replied. The banker closed the book. He exhaled through his nose. "You bought yourself another year." Samuel held his gaze. "That's all we need." The banker mounted his horse without another word. This time, when he rode away, he did not look back. The valley shifted after that. Neighbors stopped whispering and started helping. A fence mended here. A calf watched there. No announcements. Just work, the kind that mattered. Grace learned to sit, then to crawl. Luke followed her everywhere, patient and proud. Samuel laughed more. Margaret slept easier. One evening, as leaves turned gold, Margaret stood alone in the field, Grace balanced on her hip. She watched Samuel and Luke repair a gate together. The sound of their voices carried easy and sure. She remembered the woman she had been, the one who stood on a porch shaking, the one who believed her body was broken beyond repair, the one who thought love was something you earned by usefulness. That woman felt far away now. Samuel joined her at the fence. He slid an arm around her waist. "You okay?" Quote. She nodded. "I was just thinking." "Dangerous," he said lightly. She smiled and leaned into him. "Do you ever regret it?" Quote. He looked at Grace, then Luke, then back at her. Not once. Winter returned, but gentler this time. Snow fell soft. The fire burned steady. The house held warmth like a promise kept. On Grace's first birthday, the town gathered quietly. No speeches, no spectacle. Just a table, a cake, and a child laughing at candlelight. Margaret held her daughter and felt complete in a way she had never dared imagine. Not because of the miracle alone, but because of everything that came before it. The choosing, the waiting, the standing firm when the world said no. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Margaret sat by the fire with Samuel. "I used to think being broken meant being useless," she said. Samuel took her hand. "Broken things know how to hold." She rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but it did not reach them. The ranch endured. The family grew. And in Cedar Hollow Valley, people learned that the strongest homes were not built from perfection, but from grace freely given and fiercely kept. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Archives of the Wild West, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.